Welcome to Unit 6 on states of consciousness, otherwise known as Sleep Week. So this is a super short unit where we mostly talk about material relating to sleep, but we'll also touch a little bit on hypnosis and the effects of psychoactive drugs. So the first thing that we need to cover is, what is consciousness? Consciousness is actually a spectrum of your level of awareness of what's going on around you. So in certain situations, you can be highly conscious and highly aware of what's going on, and in certain situations, you can be very unaware of what's going on or not very conscious. We also relate this to your level of cognitive arousal or attentive arousal, which hopefully you remember the brain structure associated with attentive arousal, which is the reticular formation. And so when we look at states of consciousness, we categorize them into two basic categories, I guess, if you will. So we have waking consciousness, and then we have altered states of consciousness. So waking consciousness is so different than all the altered states of consciousness. We classify it differently. So when you are in waking consciousness, this is where you can think and feel. Your frontal lobe can reflect and plan and make decisions. But any state in which you are not in that high functioning alertness that your frontal lobe is able to function at its optimum, we say that you are in an altered state of consciousness. So it differs in some fashion from your traditional waking state. And here are some examples of those altered states of consciousness that you can enter into. And a lot of times people think that to be in an altered state of consciousness, you have to be asleep or in a coma. But a lot of them you can be awake, but just not fully aware of what's going on around you. So we've got some that occur, what we say, spontaneously, so like daydreaming. You're still awake, but you're not fully conscious of what's going on. We've got physiological or biologically induced altered states of consciousness, and then you have psychologically induced altered states of consciousness as well. And it's important to know when looking at altered states of consciousness that your brain actually operates most of the time in a subconscious level. About 90% of the things that your brain is processing at every moment happen without you being aware of it. And so examples that we've got on the screen here is, if you are driving a car, most of the time you're not really thinking about driving. You're devoting your mental energy to thinking about something else, planning ahead for your day, or thinking about the task that you're going to next. Typing a text message or typing on the computer. Most of us can do that without thinking, and so our brain is able to devote energy to other things. Thus, we're operating on that subconscious level. So even that is an altered form of consciousness, even though we are awake. Other examples, we talked about in sensation and perception, when you notice a bird flying through the air, you're subconsciously processing its color, form, movement, and distance all at the same time, which hopefully you remember is called parallel processing. And so the subconscious processing is a huge part of what our brain does. And then lastly, it's important to know that when our consciousness is operating, it's really slow. So for us to be cognitively aware that something has happened, it's usually about 0.35 seconds after it's actually happened. So if I tell you to drop your pencil, when I say go, I'll say go, you'll drop your pencil, but your brain isn't actually aware that you've dropped your pencil until 0.35 seconds after you've actually dropped the pencil. And we know that because we've done EEG scans on people, and we can see, we'll tell them go, and they'll drop the pencil, and it's only 0.35 seconds later that the brain was actually changed to show that something has changed, that they've dropped the pencil. So we're kind of almost always living in the past when it comes to our consciousness. So our awareness is different than an actual event that takes place. The last important, just general thing that we need to know about consciousness is how it has evolved as the definition of psychology has evolved. So I know that all of you know that the contemporary or the present day definition of psychology is the scientific study of mental processes and behaviors, but it wasn't always that definition. So we learned at the beginning of the year that psychology was really just the study of consciousness. Behavior didn't exist in it. And that was Titchener and Wundt with structuralism and introspection, and they were looking into the mind. And then we get the behaviorists that come forward, so Watson, Pavlov, Skinner, who say that we need to observe behavior. That's a part of psychology as well. And they said that we shouldn't look at the mental processes because you can't measure them. And so for a while there, consciousness wasn't studied anymore. It was just behavior because of the unreliability of consciousness to be studied. And then finally, in the 1960s, they bring consciousness back, and we get the modern day contemporary definition of psychology, which is the scientific study of mental processes and behaviors. So consciousness is kind of, it started off with psychology, then it was pushed away, and then we have it now again today. So that's kind of the history of how it's evolved with our definition.
That really wraps it up for this video. All I wanted to do is do a quick introduction to what is consciousness and why are we studying it. So just make sure you know the definition of consciousness, how to differentiate between being awake and then being in the altered states of consciousness, the fact that our subconscious dominates most of our day, the fact that consciousness is slow, and then make sure you know the history of the study of consciousness and how it ebbed and flowed as the definition of psychology was in the works throughout the 1800s and 1900s. Tomorrow we're going to start on the stages of sleep, and I will see you then.